I want to introduce. Well, I want to. It's always great to have Dr. Jeremy Horpedahl on the program. Jeremy, how you doing, sir?
I'm great, Paul. How are you this morning?
I'm great. Now, I want to remind everybody, Jeremy is with the Arkansas Center for Research in Economics. I wanted to have you on because I know we've talked about this before, but your study on special elections is so good. We talked about it before, but we still have in Arkansas a string of special elections. There's, been one in Fort Smith. There's been some in Central Arkansas. There's one coming up right after school starts in Jonesboro to try to raise taxes. And your research. Well, let me just start there. What made you want to do this research?
So I got interested in this actually as I was working on another project. We wrote a big book on taxes in Arkansas, about 100 pages long. And as we were doing the research for that book, I came across all this great data on special elections. I was actually able to get data on almost every election going back to the early 1980s. And as an economist, I get really excited when I see this big set of data. And I thought, what can I do with this? And looking at special elections and when do they pass and when do they fail, that's something that you see in the news. Like you said, there's one somewhere almost every month. So I just started looking at that data, and I think we got some pretty interesting results here. One of the main results, I think, as we've talked about before, is that most of these, and we look at sales tax elections, which are the vast majority of these special elections, almost all of them, 80%, take place during sometime other than the general or primary election. So 83% are during either it's a standalone election or it's at some time other than the general or primary election. And what we also found is that voter turnout is much, much lower during these special elections. We found that on average, voter turnout is only 19% for these special elections, whereas it's over 40% for general elections. And then finally, the other thing, which I think is the main result, is that these tax increases, sales tax increases, are much more likely to pass during a special election. 3/4 of them pass if they're during a special election, and fewer than half pass if it's during a general election.
And that's to me is sad because if it were an emergency, let's say a tornado comes through town, okay, go for it. But there are people who are you're an economist, so there are people who are at work. They're trying to put food on their family. They're trying they're trying to put food on the table for their family, and they're doing these things, and they pretty much know. You know what? You vote once every 2 years. You really have the big vote once every 4 years, and that's pretty much it. The rest of the time, a lot of people don't even listen to the news except once every 4 years to figure out who they want to vote for president. And that's the way a lot of people work. And they're not looking into their local tax rate. But if they actually got a vote, if they were there during the general election, most of your hardworking Arkansans don't want to pay more taxes. They want the taxes to stay where they are.
Yeah, and I think one other type of election, which are school board elections, those used to kind of be at just any time the school district wanted to set it before. A few years ago, the legislature said, we're still going to have it be a standalone election, but we're at least going to put it on a regular date so people can expect it. So school board elections now they're special in the sense that they're a standalone election, but they have it on a regular date. There have been bills in the legislature the past 2 sessions to do the same thing for these tax elections, these tax votes, but it hasn't gotten through. So there are people trying to get this changed. And actually, the title of the bill says, the goal of this is to increase voter turnout. That's explicitly what they're trying to do. Make sure everyone is having a chance to be aware of the election and have a say. But as of yet, none of those have passed. So the cities and counties can still hold these with a lot of discretion as to when the election is.
We're talking with Dr. Jeremy Horpedahl from the Arkansas Center for Research in Economics. He's also an associate professor at the University of Central Arkansas. So I can't help but bring in, and I know, we're not necessarily talking, well, maybe feel free, to talk about the ethical problem with this, because that's really what I think this is. Political views aside, if you've got a politician who's on the far right that wants lower taxes or maybe wants to pass a tax cut during the special election, or you've got, most of the time, these politicians want to pass tax increases. And this study is very well done, again, from 1981 to 2018. You know, regardless of where you stand, the concept of good government, we want, these democratic elections to mean something. And so you would think, regardless of what you believe personally as an elected official, that you want the largest sample of the people you govern to come to the ballot box. And the reality is, according to this study, in a special election, you get an average of 19% voter turnout versus 44%, according to your numbers, if you were to hold it during a general election. And so, I mean, I have called it deception, Jeremy, because I think that's really kind of what it is. I don't think it's ethical to do this when, we're talking about the people's money.
Yeah, I mean, that's something that with the data we tried to get some information about, why are these being held at different times? But I couldn't really find anything on that. So as an economist, I can't really comment on, why they're doing this. I can just talk about what's the result. I think one important thing to remember here with sales taxes is that the Tax Foundation in Washington, D.C. just released a report this month. They do an update every 6 months on what states have the highest sales tax rates when you take the state rate and add in all the local rates. And Arkansas now, for the first time, has the highest sales tax rate in the country. We're tied with Tennessee at about 9.5%. So we have the highest sales tax rate in the country when you take account of local rates. And so, part of my motivation for looking at that is to say, why is that?
Yeah.
Why do we have such a high sales tax rate? And when you look at Tennessee, they don't have an income tax. So among states which have an income tax, we have by far the highest sales tax. And I think that this is, we're not the only state that allows this, but Arkansas has very loose restrictions about when these can be held, when these elections can be held, what they can be about. So I think this is at least part of the reason that we have such high sales tax rates here, is because there's just a lot of discretion for local governments to hold these elections. And I should also say that, I've been called to testify about some of these bills that have been proposed. And groups like the Arkansas Municipal League, they're actually okay with this change as long as there are provisions in it to allow, if there's a tornado and they need to raise taxes to help pay for that, for emergencies. And the bills have included that. The Municipal League, which is the main kind of lobbying group for city governments, they're actually okay with these changes, but still it hasn't gone through.
Well, I hope we can get another shot at it. I like how you have the percentages, but you also have the total number of special elections from 1981 to 2018, 798 elections, which, special or others. Now, talk about the cost of that, right? Because there's also an added cost of taxpayer money to put on a special election.
Right. So this is something where we didn't have data on all, 1,000 elections, but we had a number that we could find data on. And so we said, what's kind of the average cost, depending on the population size, multiplied by how many of these there's have been. And we estimate that the total cost has been about $10 million over that, it's over, a 30-year time period. So in some sense, maybe $10 million isn't very much, but this is an additional cost that cities and counties are incurring. If you hold it during the general election, there's no cost to doing it, right? So for a city, maybe for a smaller city, maybe it costs $20,000 to do this. That's $20,000 that's in some sense completely unnecessary. It's just one more line on the general election ballot or the primary election, but they're going out of their way to have a completely separate election, which is a cost whether the thing passes or not. So we did find that it varies depending on the size of the electorate, but we found close to $10 million of additional costs that cities and counties have incurred since the 1980s.
So back to your previous point about Arkansas now having the highest sales tax in the nation, or tied with Tennessee. The distinction there would be that Tennessee has no income tax, right?
Right. They have no income tax, and their property taxes they're a little higher than us, but they're pretty comparable. So on property tax, about the same. On sales tax, we're the same, but they have no income tax. So that's a
loaded question.
That's a big difference.
Loaded question. I mean, how do they do it? How do they survive and on that? I mean, is it population? They got more population than us. I mean, what gives? Why can't we lower our sales tax rate?
Well, part of it is just spending is different. So they spend, it's not dramatically less, but they spend a little bit less than us per capita. They have more people, right? So for certain things, they can kind of spread the cost over more people. So that's in some sense an advantage. But as you know, I've got some other research that kind of looks at this spending and compares Arkansas to other states. And we're working on an update to that as well to kind of look in more detail about, as you've reported, and I know you like this paper we've written about how Arkansas state government spends a lot more than neighboring states. We're kind of trying to drill down to see why is that. What areas do we spend more on? What has increased? And so we're trying to figure that out. So, a large part of what drives the need for higher taxes is higher spending. But also, when you increase taxes, they do always find something to spend that money on. So, in some sense, it goes both ways. But the spending is the it's clearly the other side of it.
Okay, I mean, I'm glad. I appreciate that. I think that's certainly something that we've heard, even from a lot of lawmakers. In this last session, people, saying, listen, there really wasn't much talk about, getting the spending under control, or cutting spending so we don't have to raise taxes over here. And now, of course, the people are facing a net tax increase for the next couple of fiscal years or several fiscal years. Dr. Jeremy Horpedahl, I always love having you on. I love your research. Please let me know, or I'll certainly be watching the ACRE website for the updated paper on spending and what separates Arkansas from our neighbors. And really appreciate the work you do, sir.
Well, thanks, Paul. I appreciate you having me on, and I hope you have a good day.
Yes, sir. Have a great day. Folks, we're going to make a separate YouTube video of this. It'll be up at conduitnews.com. Again, I want to go over these numbers one more time. Throw this up. Can you throw this up real quick? I want to end here. Arkansas local sales tax elections. Look at that graphic right there. 44% voter turnout in general elections. When you have a 44% voter turnout, you wind out with the tax increase passing 46% of the time. In a primary, you have 24% voter turnout, and the tax increase passes 61% of the time. In a special election, you have a 19% voter turnout, again, from 1981 to 2018, and a 76% passage rate for the tax increase. This is why communities like Fort Smith and Jonesboro try to do special elections, because they know that if they do a special election, there's less voter turnout, and there's a higher probability that the tax increase will be passed. I think that is wrong. What do you think?